Kevin, I want to start where we left off with Emily just now, and this bottleneck that we're seeing when it comes to developing these data centers. What, in your view, would be the right policy to decrease the U.S. reliance on China for these key parts?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we need to consider this AI infrastructure build out as a national challenge. We've seen that across 11 different states, there have been considerations of bans or years-long moratoria on data center creation. And as you know well, data centers aren't just for AI. We need data centers for healthcare, for commerce, for all the things that make the internet go. And so we need to really emphasize that states, cities, and the national government all have a role in making sure we can build AI infrastructure that's aligned with our AI ambitions.
Okay, so yes, in my backyard is certainly, in your view, a big part of this, but that still doesn't address the component problem that Emily and the team highlighted in her piece. How do you make sure that the U.S. actually has access to these key components, these key parts, when China has a stronghold on them?
So this is where we really do need to work with our allies in developing and strong-arming our supply chain network across the entire AI tech stack. As you've noted, we've seen that when it comes to chips, when it comes to things like helium that's being locked up in Qatar, we have a long ways to go in terms of making sure that we have that sort of resilience and redundancy that's required to build AI at scale. And so this requires, ultimately, unsurprisingly, funding and political leadership. And right now we're seeing that there's a sort of tendency to not be swimming in the same direction on this AI question. And that's in part for understandable reasons, but ultimately we need to make this a national priority.
Funding from whom, though, Kevin? A national priority, does that mean you want to see the U.S. government and taxpayers shell out money for this stuff?
I do want to see increased investment from the U.S. government in this domain. We've seen over the history of our nation that when it comes to critical infrastructure, ultimately the central government does have a role in making sure we have a national highway system, in making sure that our port system is resilient, to go all the way back to the Articles of Confederation. So yes, this ultimately is a core purpose of the government, is to make sure that basic infrastructure for the technologies of an age is available and not subject to geopolitical conflict.
So your view is that infrastructure such as this is as important, at least historically in the current context, as highways, as ports, as other huge national projects. How do you get leaders on board with this?
So first and foremost, we have to do a lot of work in terms of just making sure we're addressing a lot of the myths that are being spread about this AI build-out. So for example, there was an article recently that made headwinds and made the rounds on social media about how data centers were creating heat islands wherever they were being built. Well, if you talk to folks like Andy Masley, who studied this issue closer than just about anyone, we see that a lot of this information is in fact bunk. And so the more that we have sort of misinformation flowing about how AI is being used and developed, those are ultimately distracting questions. And we need to move on to the questions related to the fact that AI is increasingly a national security imperative. We're seeing right now, for example, in the war in Iran, that militaries are using AI in ever more sophisticated domains. And it's a real national imperative that the U.S. military have access to leading frontier models that are the most capable and that are the most reliable across the world.
Kevin, you study this stuff, so maybe you have an answer, because it certainly doesn't seem like a lot of people do have answers to this. If we look at increased demand for electricity across the grid, and the way that the grid is being taxed in a way now that many people didn't think it would be in the year 2026, and the projections for the future, how do you balance the desire and the need, in your view, to build these data centers in the U.S., draw on power from American power plants, but also make sure that American consumers aren't seeing hiked power bills as a result? Is it even possible?
I would say it is indeed possible. So I'm a man of many tired lines. One of my tired lines is today's AI is the worst AI we will ever use. I'll also say that today's data centers are the worst data centers we'll ever use. There is a huge incentive for these hyperscalers to invest in means for more efficient data center operations. And we're seeing that states like Oklahoma, for example, are enabling behind-the-meter power that allows for these labs to build out more renewable and efficient data centers operations. And so we've actually seen that when you talk to folks like Gavin McCormick at Climate Trace, that there are opportunities for labs to actually assist with making the grid more resilient and actually increasing the grid capacity by virtue of doing training runs, for example, at low hours of typical power usage.